Hi, so I'm going to make this short video to cover the Minitorch introduction in Module 0 that I did on class on Monday, but I saw that the sound cut out about 3 minutes into the lecture. And I know several of you had questions about trying to get your environment set up and how to get working on this module. So I'm just going to do a real quick demo of the way I like to work using VS Code. And similar steps for other IDEs. You can also do a lot of this on the command line. So yeah, the first thing to do probably is to visit this website if you're just getting started. And you can see here that this first module, Module 0, is the one we're going to be working on. And it's going to talk about the project as a whole. You have access to the slides for the project. You want to look through those. But then you just want to continue through the next buttons and you'll get to the install page. Okay, and they've got a system here. Note that they want you to use 3.7 or higher. And they've got some steps for setting up your virtual environment and get cloning your repo specific for this module 0 under the class GitHub page. So yeah, we're going to follow these steps real quick, but in a VS Code kind of way. So the first thing to do is get your repo link, which you should have already got when you accepted the invitation for the module. See, mine is right here. So I'm just going to follow this link. And this is the repo. See, mine's already done because I did this a couple weeks ago now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the link. You can also just copy it from up here. Then I'm going to open VS Code. And then I'm going to open the hot menu. I'll do this a lot. This is a Control-Shift-P on a Windows machine. It's something similar on a Mac. But you see, I have a git clone option. I use this all the time, so it's right at the top. And then I'm just going to paste my repository address right here. And it's going to ask me where I want to store my repository. Now, I like to put everything in projects. You can see here's all my projects. I'm going to make a new folder because there's going to be a lot of repos associated with these modules. I'll just put it in demo for now, and I'm just going to select this repository location. And it's going to clone the repository, and when it's done, it's going to ask me if I want to open it. So I will open it. And you can see here's all the files. Here's my README, not very readable in this format. And it's going to start discovering Python interpreters and set up all of my extensions. So the first thing you will notice is that, or that I would do is I would select my interpreter. If I was working in Python, you can see here's all the environments that VS Code was able to discover. So they're very good at discovering content environments. Also some of the just other Python versions I've installed in my system. And it's going to ask me if I want to select a Python interpreter usually. I'm just going to say no for now because we are going to set up a virtual environment as per the instructions on the Minitorch page. So in your folder, and you can do this in your demo folder. This is how I showed you in class, or you could just do it right here in the module folder, which is what I will do now, is I'm going to just install a Python environment. But the first thing I want to do, if I'm going to install a virtual environment using the Python scripts, is I want to know which Python I'm installing. So I always just check which version of Python I have right now. So right now I'm running 3.8. This should have good compatibility with all the Minitorch stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and use it. So I'm just going to run the command to create a virtual environment. And you can see there that the folder was made on the left. And now code's going to ask me if I want to use this virtual environment. I'm just going to say yes. So now you can see here down on the bottom left of VS Code, we're actually using the virtual environment that we just created. And once that's done, what I usually do is I just open a new terminal. You can just do that by closing these and you know opening a new terminal, and you can see it just automatically runs the activation script. If you're on OS X, it should do a similar function. And then, yeah, you can see now my virtual environment is activated. Now, if you're following along in the slides or on the website, you see that, we basically just did this first step here, and we already did this activation step. That's what VS Code did for us automatically. So now what we need to do is we need to install all of the requirements, which are, these requirement files hold the libraries that are required to run the code in the project. So I'm just going to run these commands. Pretty simple. Sometimes I like to just designate that I want to use this particular Python environment, and that's when you want to use the python-m command. And notice I don't have to say Python 3 because my virtual environment has Python, only Python 3 installed in it. So I can drop the Python 3 when I'm calling Python. I just call it Python. And when I want to install a requirements file, I use the R tag. And first I'll do the requirements.txt. Okay, and now we'll install the next one, which is the requirements extras.txt. Okay, so that took a while. So maybe you don't want to do that every time. So I would maybe recommend to you that you install your virtual environment somewhere else, and then you just activate it for your module. But one step that you will always need to do for your project is you're going to have to do a pip. Oops, got my caps lock on. You're going to want to run these tags to update your locally installed library, which should be here, just with a dot. That just means in the current location. So now you can see it's going to go ahead and set up Minitorch. So Minitorch, you can see over here, this is the module that we are going to be modifying for the homework. So you pretty much always need to run that pip update command for your current folder when you're in your module folder. And that way you will have the Minitorch module installed in the project. And that's important so you can, call these functions these functions and classes that are defined in this module. Okay, so now that we have got our environment set up, and you can see that, yes, indeed, the virtual environment that we created is installed as the Python interpreter for VS Code, then we should have this testing button over here. So we can click on that, and you can see my tests are not configured yet, so I can select this button. The other option is you can go to the hotbar and you can go to test. And there's also the option here, but I'll just select this one. And yes, for this project, we're not using unit tests, so don't select that one. You're going to want to select the PyTest framework. And the existing configuration file should be fine. It should discover all the tests. So you can say use existing configuration file. And now it's going to go through and try and find the test. And yeah, so you can see here, if I expand this, it successfully found all the tests in the project. So when you're discovering tests in your project, you should have all of these tests discovered for module 0. So now I'm just going to go ahead and run all these tests. And if you did this before you made any changes to your code, none of them would pass because that's how the assignment is defined. But now, so most of mine are going to pass because I already did this assignment. I just broke a couple for demonstration purposes. So you can see it takes a little while to run all of these tests. So, in the future, when you're coding, you can just run individual test like this, or you can run individual files. Or using the command line, you can use some tags to say, I just want to do all the tests for task 0 through task 4. It's good. And those are the ones that you're going to be graded on. So it's not a bad idea if you're curious. So now you can see here that all of the tests were run. And since some of them failed, these parent folders are all going to be marked as fails. But then within these files, you can see that, all of these passed. But here in my test operator file, several of the tests failed. So if you're curious on, what the problem is, you can click the button and it'll take you to the test, and then it'll have some descriptor here, right? That says there was a undefined assertion error, failure here for these 2 values. And you can see here that what this test is testing is that our multiplication function, our addition function, our negation function, and our max function are all basically the same as Python's built-in functions, right? So here's their Python addition function, the Python product function, and a simple inline operation for finding a max value. So all of these should be working, but you can see obviously this test failed. So some of those are not working. So if we go look at operators, I mean, I include some of these so it was really obvious, but in the multiplication function, which is supposed to take 2 values, x and y, it's, that should just return the product of 2, but I introduced a squared on the second term there. So if I save this, and there should be a special function for product here, right, that failed in addition to all of the to this one that we were looking at before, the test same as Python. There's also one called test product. If I run this one now, you can see that it passes. So let's see, what other one did I break? Okay, I broke the addition operation. So yeah, I put in a ×2 there. And I think that's it. So now if we go back and look at test operation, I think these were the 2 that were broken. So if I run this one again, yeah, you can see that it passes. So this is a good example because in this one, we're going to be using this defined assertion method here that we're importing from the strategies file, which all it does is say, if these 2 values are close enough, we're going to call this a pass. So if the value returned by our function multiplier or multiply is the same as Python's built-in function, then we're just going to say, as long as they're close within some tolerance, that this one will pass. So all of the other ones look like this. Some of these you're going to have to define yourself. So, and a lot of these operators in the operator file, you're going to have to define yourself. But I think that should get you started on the test framework. The only thing to note here is that as in the slides, if we go back to those, you can see that, we have different ways of running test here. So for instance, we can just run PyTest from the command line. So let's just run, for instance, just for task 1. So now because, my virtual environment is activated, that means that PyTest should be installed. And if you're ever curious, you can do a pip list. And this is all of the packages that are currently installed in the environment. You can see, sure enough, we have PyTest installed. So now I can just run this PyTest command. And it says that all tasks for task 1 passed, excuse me. And if you're curious, like what the tasks are for task 1, you can look through the code, but you can also look on the Minitorch framework website. And if you just go to, this is a little bit more about, how to use the Minitorch committing on the GitHub. But if you go here, if you just keep scrolling through, I mean, this is all good information. I encourage you to read it. But if you just want to get to the assignment, you come down to the bottom and you keep going through here to fundamentals. Then you can see on this page, we're going to have task. And these are the tasks that you need to do in the assignment. So you can see here, here's a to do. And I want you to complete these functions so that all the tests marked with task 01 are completed. So here is the description of all of the functions. And I think the most complicated one is the sigmoid function, which you guys are already familiar with. And then it goes through these other tasks. So, you know, in task 2, you're going to have to write a testing function. Task 3, you're going to have to define some functional Python functions that we talked a little bit about in class, but there's all the instructions are here. And then in task 4, you're going to have to define some methods of the Minitorch module that we will be developing, including how to identify all of the name parameters in the module. So, and then the last part is just to run the Streamlit app and, you know, just play with it and paste a picture into the README file. So you can see in my repo here, I did that, right? Here's the README file. And, you know, if you can look up online how to use Markdown, but if you just want to copy mine, then, you know, you just put your screenshot or whatever your picture is called into your folder, and then you just can use this image source tag in the Markdown file for the README, and it should work correctly. VS Code, you can also, you know, you can preview these Markdown files. So you can see here's mine with the picture rendered. So the other thing that we graded on is the Flake 8. So as in the slides, there's some instructions here about how to run Flake 8. So it's always a good idea to run Black. Black will format your document into the proper style, but it won't necessarily handle all of the little things that Flake 8 is going to catch. So as I showed in class, I encourage you to run Flake 8, and you can run it just on your folder structure, you know, like individual folders. So, you know, I'm going to run Flake 8 here, and it gives me some warnings here. So it says line 13, I have a missing white space after a comma. So if you just want to see what that looks like, you can go down here to line 13. And yeah, see, I should have a space there. That's just a Python convention. And then there should be there's a missing white space around the operator on line 24 here, which is this one. So I fix that. It says there's too many blank lines at line 30. So you can see here, there's just too many blank lines. We only need 2 in between functions. Now, here's a little more complicated one. In line 43, it says we're missing the returns in the docstring. So yeah, if you look here, we have our docstring. This is the standard format where we have adds to scalars, we have the arguments, and then we should have in a docstring what the function returns. So I'm just going to add that. Returns we'll just call it X, the addition of the inputs. Something like that, just some description of what it returns. And then we just have a couple others. Let's see, line 49, we have white spaces in our blank. So that was probably there. And here on line 51, our block comment should start with a hash. So that's just here. There should be a space is really what that's trying to tell you. That, right, it's a hash space. So all comments should be separated by a space from the comment indicator. So now if we save this and we run Flake 8 again, Yeah, just one more comment here. We have a trailing white space on line 47. So yeah, just fix that. And lots of just little things like that to go through and fix. It's good practice. Makes your code much more readable for other people, which is always a good thing. So now you can see, at least in the Minitorch folder, I don't have any Flake8 problems. Now you can set up Flake8 as your linter here in VS Code, and it should catch most of those things if it's working correctly. It never works quite correctly for me, so I'm not sure why, because that's, oh, there it goes. So it just takes a second. So yeah, now, so if you go past it, you can see there's a little error there. And it wants me to put a space. So sometimes those little red squigglies are not that obvious, but it should help you if you want to do it that way. And I think that basically should cover it. I mean, the rest is just submitting, which you can use the GitHub framework here. Just encourage you not to add your virtual environment, but that should be easy to do by either just not adding it or adding it to the gitignore file. So we made some changes to operators, so I'm gonna add this, and I'm gonna add a message, and I just say updated operators to pass test and fix style, and I will commit that. Yeah, and then down here I can select sync. So I'll push my comments and I'll just say okay. We'll wait for that to be done. Okay, that should be done. So now I should be able to go back to the repository here. And if I go to actions, again, this is my repository in the class folder. You can see here's my commit. I updated operators. And if I select this, you can see that it's going to auto grade it as soon as it gets a chance in the queue. So, this might not happen automatically, but you can see, I mean, this isn't going to be perfect because I did not fix all of the bugs in my code. You see, I still have problems with some of my operators. So this should not be a perfect score, and I don't want to wait for it. So maybe we can go and look at one of my previous commits. So here's what a good one looks like, I guess. And you can see here that if I look at the results of the auto grading, you can see that I passed my coding style, all passed in task 1, all passed in task 2, all passed in task 3 and task 4. So they all passed. I get some kudos here, and I get all my points. So yeah, if you don't complete all the tasks, you pretty much lose all the points, at least in this auto grading system. But as I mentioned in class, we will keep that in mind when we are grading the assignment. I mean, you won't necessarily lose everything if you don't pass all the tests for task 1. So yeah, I just want you to be aware of that's not how we will grade it. So, but I encourage you to get all of your tests to work. I think that's good practice. It might take a while to debug. Personally, I think that task 4 is the hardest. I mean, definitely task 3 has some challenges with the functional programming, but task 4 is definitely a challenge. So, if you struggle with that, don't be too concerned. We'll take that into consideration when we're grading, that it was a hard one. So yeah, I think that I mean there's a lot more slides here. We talked about other things, but I think most of it's pretty self-explanatory if you go through these slides. I don't think I gave any particular tips on how to do these functional ones except for, look up some examples. I mean, look at the Python library to see how they implement map if you want. That's one tip. Lots of tutorials about there about how to map and reduce. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Besides, slogging through the assignment. So if you have any questions, again, you can come to my office hours, or you can shoot me an email or talk to me on Discord. So yeah. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. Have a good day.